One of the reasons math ends up being so useful when studying business and economics is that it provides you with a natural and precise way to talk about money. Imagine you're a business owner and you want to assess the marketability of a new product. A couple of questions that you're going to have to ask are, first of all, how much is it going to cost to produce that product? And second of all, how much could you sell it for? Now, only once you've answered those questions are you really in a position to ask more complicated questions like what would your profit margin be and so on and so forth. But before we go down that road, we're going to need to introduce some terminology. And what I mean by that is we're going to introduce some new terms and we're going to have to come to an agreement on exactly what those terms mean. So let's say, for example, that you own a Starbucks. Before you sell a single cup of coffee, you're going to have to incur some costs. For one, you're going to have to rent a building to have the cafe inside, right? You're going to have computer systems so that your employees can communicate with each other efficiently. If you're going to have the lights on, you're going to have to, well, if it's the winter time, you're going to have to heat the building. And if it's really hot in the summertime, then you might have to have air conditioning. These are all costs that are completely independent of how much coffee you either produce or sell. So these are referred to as fixed costs. And more generally, if we say the fixed cost of a product, that's the sum of all of these costs that are independent of the level of production. So I've already mentioned some examples, but let's write a few things down. So these are usually include things like rent for the building, utilities for keeping the lights on and possibly heating it. And you're also going to have somebody in charge of the business, right? Usually that's called a general manager. And typically employees that have that sort of a position will be paid not by the hour, but by just an annual salary, right? So, and in general, you usually refer to your salaried employees or your salaried wages as fixed costs. So that's one type of cost. The other type of cost would be the variable costs. So these are the costs that are associated with the product itself that you're producing, right? So these are the costs that go up as you produce and sell more of your product. So uh, back to the Starbucks example, what would that include, right? If you're going to sell a cup of coffee, what do you need to, what goes along with that? What kind of costs? You're going to have to put the coffee in a cup, right? Those paper cups are going to cost you money. You're going to have to put lids on the cups. You're going to need those sleeves that go on it so people don't burn their hands when the beverages are hot. You're going to need napkins. You're going to need condiments like cream and sugar. Those sorts of things, those are variable costs because the more product you produce and sell, the more those costs are. So let's say the variable cost of a product is just the sum of all the sorts of costs that we just mentioned. Now, most of those can be classified under just the word materials, right? All the things that you need to put together to assemble a cup of coffee, right? So just to run through those lists again, you need the cups, lids, sleeves, you need the actual coffee. So you're going to need to actually have coffee beans to grind and brew with hot water and pour into the cup. But then you're also going to need employees to put this all together and actually serve the coffee, right? And that's going to be costs in the form of hourly wages. And this isn't going to be precise or accurate, but for example, the way you might factor this in is you might say, okay, for every cup of coffee that we sell, that's going to be 2 to 3 minutes of paid time that you're going to have to pay an employee wages for. Okay, so these are referred to as the variable cost of a product. Okay, so then what about if you put these together? Well, then you get what's referred to as the total cost. So the total cost of a product is just the sum of its fixed cost and its variable cost. So let's write the following. We'll say total cost is equal to fixed cost plus the variable cost. And that's actually our first formula. So I'm just going to start a habit here of putting a yellow box around formulas. And you can see I've already started a habit of putting a red underline below every term that we're introducing. And I recommend that you do that in your notes as well. Sometimes we'll just underline terms and sometimes we'll actually fill them in on these worksheets and underline them in red. But really, it doesn't matter which colors you use. It just matters that you have a convention and you stick to it. It'll just help your note taking go more smoothly, and it'll also help your studying go more smoothly when you're looking through these notes later to find key pieces of information. Okay, so that's cost. The other side of the coin is revenue, right? So the money that you make from selling a product. So the revenue is just the money that's generated. So whenever you produce a unit of your product and you sell it for a particular price, you're going to generate revenue. So there's a formula for revenue. It's fairly straightforward. So I'll just say total revenue is going to equal the number of units sold, and that's going to be multiplied by the price of each unit. So for example, just think back to the Starbucks example. If you're selling cups of coffee, let's say, then your unit uh, of your product would be just, let's keep it simple. Let's just say a cup of coffee, right? Obviously, it's more complicated than that. There's different sizes, and then there's also lots of different types of coffee you can buy, and they all have different prices. But let's just keep it simple. Let's say you're just talking about coffee here, and you've only got one size. Then maybe your uh, price per unit might be $2 for a cup of coffee, and maybe you sell 50 cups of coffee. Well, then you're going to have a total revenue of $100. Okay, so that's just an example of what that might look like, but that's another formula. Okay, and then finally, uh, what do you get when you combine cost and revenue? You get profit. In particular, the profit is the amount of revenue that you have left over once you subtract the costs. So let's write that down. The profit is given by this formula. So total profit, and this is usually what you're interested in the most, right? Because this is the money that you put in your pocket at the end of the day. So the total profit is your total cost minus, no, I had that backwards, not your total cost, minus your total revenue minus your total cost. Okay, and you probably already are noticing that it's a bit cumbersome to write out formulas like this, right? When we're writing out phrases and complete words inside the mathematical expressions. And typically that's not what you do. Typically what you'll do is you'll introduce variables. So for example, you might say the total revenue and call it R. And then you could take the cost and call that C. And then you could take the profit and call that P. And then that would make, then you could just write P is equal to R minus C, and it would become much more brief. And that's typically what you do. And as we move forward, we'll start introducing more concise notation for these ideas. Okay, so let's take a look at this example. So we're told that a plant is producing items, and we're not told what the items are. It's just general. And I like to call these abstract examples because they don't actually give you a concrete explanation of what exactly you're producing and selling. It just says something generic like items or units. And you know that can sometimes make things a bit simpler because sometimes the details will actually bog you down a bit and make things more complicated than they need to be. So sometimes just staying general makes things easier. But if you like, just use your imagination, right? It could be, think of this as cups of coffee, sandwiches, t-shirts, baseball hats, pads of paper, anything really. You've got the freedom to just imagine something that you're producing and selling. And we're not told what those things are exactly, but we are given some information. We're told what the variable cost of this product is at $6 per unit. And we're also told that they sell for a price of $15 each. That's some other important information. And what else? We're told that there's a fixed cost associated with this product, and it's $250,000. And then we're asked to find the total profit. And you notice right away, if you've been reading carefully, we don't actually have enough information to determine what the total profit is because we don't know how many of these items were produced and sold. If there's not very many of them produced and sold, maybe we're not going to make any profit at all. Maybe we're going to have a net loss because those fixed costs are very high. But if we sell a lot of the product, well, then maybe we will have profit. Maybe if we sell so many that in comparison those fixed costs don't seem so large anymore. I mean, that's your hope as a business owner, right? Then we'll have some profit. So it's going to depend how many units of this product are produced and sold. So in part A, the letter Q has actually been introduced to represent that unknown number of units of this product that are produced and sold. And what you're going to do in part A is you're going to find out what the profit is as a function of that unknown variable Q. So in other words, basically come up with a formula that you can use to compute the profit as long as you know how many units were produced and sold. And then in part B, we're going to use that formula to figure out exactly what the total profit would be when we produce and sell 40,000 units of the product. Notice that it just says produced in both cases. It just says the word produced here. Interpret that to mean produced and sold. Otherwise, the question is impossible, right? You have to actually know how many are, not just how many units are produced, but also how many are produced and actually sold to the market, because that's how you can figure out what the profit was. Okay, so let's just jot some things down here. Let's just summarize what's given. Well, the $250,000, that's our fixed cost, right? So let's start with that. So the fixed cost is $250,000. And by the way, the dollar sign that I included here, that just, that indicates that we're talking about a price that's measured in dollars as the units, but that would be automatic, wouldn't it? I mean, for the most part, that's what, if we're talking about a sum of money, dollars is the natural unit. So what you'll find is it gets tiring to write that all the time. So what we'll do is I'll quite often, I'll just omit the dollar sign, and you're welcome to as well. I'm not going to be picky about reading your work either. But let's agree with this convention, okay? If we ever have a situation where and this could happen, we could run into a situation where we want to measure a sum of money and our unit of choice might be cents. I mean, it's possible that there would be a situation where that would be advantageous to do so. But let's just assume that if that's the case, we'll say so, right? And if we haven't mentioned it otherwise, then let's just say the unit of measurement for sums of money should always just be dollars. And then that way we can get away with not always writing it. And because when we're doing calculations, you're gonna have to write that dollar sign an awful lot, and it actually just makes things complicated sometimes. So it's nice to just be able to omit it. So for that reason, I'll just stop writing it from now on, unless and if we're ever not working in dollars, then we'll explicitly say so and make it clear. But otherwise, just assume that sums of money are measured in dollars. Okay, so that's the fixed cost. Now the variable cost, we're told, is $6 per unit. So here's where you got to be careful. Don't just write $6, right, for the variable cost. That's not going to be accurate, because the variable cost, remember, the variable cost is a cost that grows as you sell more units. So, and that $6 per unit, well, if I just say my variable cost is $6, what that really means is it means I only sold one unit. But maybe I sold more units, right? I don't know that I only sold one. Maybe I sold 2 or 10 or 50. And in general, however many I sell, I'm going to have to multiply by 6. That's what's going to give me my variable cost. So since we don't know how many we're selling, we'll just write the letter Q. Because remember, Q represents the number of units of the product that are produced and sold. So that's what we'll do. We'll just use Q to represent that value. Okay, so that's our variable cost. Well, then what about our total cost? Remember, the total cost is what you get if you add the fixed cost and the variable cost together. So we're going to have 250,000, because that was our fixed cost, plus 6 times Q. So that's going to give you your total cost, because we've added the fixed cost and the variable cost together. And notice I skipped writing the dollar sign here, just like I said I would. Okay, revenue. What's the total revenue? That'll be what you get when you multiply the price per unit, which was given to be $15, by the quantity of units that are produced and sold. So our total revenue is going to be 15Q. Okay, so that's just kind of summarizing, well, first of all, the immediate information that's given in the question, but then also what we can really quickly calculate. But for profit, let's do that as a separate calculation here. Let's actually let's start part A here. We're actually going to work out what the total profit would be when we sell Q units of this product. Okay, so the way we're going to write this is we're going to go like this. I'm going to write capital P, that's short for profit, and then I'm going to put Q afterwards in brackets. Remember, that's the notation for writing down a function, right? Let me just interrupt myself here and make an annotation here. This is the profit as a function of Q. Because if you change the value of Q, you're going to change your profit. If you sell more, your profit's going to be higher, and if you sell less, then your profit's going to be lower, right? So profit is a function of Q. So, well, what is it? Remember, the total profit is your total revenue, which in our case is 15Q, minus your total costs, which here was 250,000 plus 6Q. Okay, so perform that subtraction. What you're going to do is you're going to distribute that negative into the brackets, and you're going to have 15Q minus 250,000 minus 6Q. So then when you collect your like terms, what you're going to end up with here is 9Q minus 250,000. Okay, and that is your profit in terms of Q. If you assume that Q is the number of units you produce and sell, then 9Q minus 250,000, that's going to be the formula that you can use to compute your total profit. Okay, so what would it look like to use that formula? Well, plug in a value of Q. And in fact, part B, we're going to do exactly that. Part B asks us to find what's the total profit when we produce and sell 40,000 units of the product. So that just means plug in 40,000 for Q, and really you're talking about P of 40,000. So just plug in the 40,000 for Q over here. So you're going to get 9 times 40,000 minus 250,000. Now feel free to use a calculator for this, but I'm just going to write down the details here. 40,000 times 9 is actually 360,000. Then when you subtract 250,000, you end up with 110,000. Okay, so that $110,000, that is your profit if you sell exactly 40,000 units. Okay, so that's an example of how you can write down your profit function and how you can actually use it as well. And I know I already mentioned this, but I just want to add this again just to make it clear and remind you guys. Assume this is in dollars. Okay, so that applies to any sum of money, really. That also applies to the ones up here where we didn't actually write dollars explicitly. So I won't write this comment all the time, but just a reminder, if we don't specify the unit of measurement for sums of money, just take it to be in dollars always.